They,
What you do? I said, I did a knee rotation.
Clock, we will call to order the Tuesday, June 27th meeting of the Common Council. Mr. Boyce, will you lead us in the pledge?
absolutely. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Moving on to the roll call. Will you call the roll?
Mr. Ayer,
Present.
Mr. Boyce,
Present.
Mr. Davis,
Present.
Mr. O'Connor,
Here.
Mr. Peterson,
Present.
Mr. Schwartz, Mr. Sparts, Ms. Wiles,
Present.
Mr. Smith.
Present.
Mr. President, you have a quorum.
Thank you. Approval of the minutes for our June 13th meeting.
Move to approve.
Second.
There's a motion and a second to approve our minutes from our June 13th meeting. This is a hand vote. All those in favor, raise your right hand. 7-0. Approval of the agenda.
Move to approve the agenda.
Second.
There's a motion and a second to approve the agenda. This is a hand vote. All those in favor, raise your right hand. 7-0. Petitions or comments by citizens who are present, I do not have any, but if you wish to speak, there are cards out there that you can give to our deputy clerk, and we will call you up when your item is considered. Council committee reports, finance.
Thank you, Mr. President. Finance Committee met June 22nd. Couple things on our agenda. One is the miscellaneous item. I don't know what number it is off the top of my head here. For the waiver of the non-compliance for the tax abatement, it's miscellaneous number 2. The property owner, through some, I think, timing issues, missed the deadline to file their abatement request for, I think, pay 23. That triggered a $1,500 late fee, which has been paid by the owner. And I think the owner's here if you have any questions, but the Finance Committee discussed it and moved it forward with a favorable recommendation. And you'll hear more about that from Mrs. Smith as well. There are some transfer items that are also on the agenda. It's the SAFER grant. As you recall, we were fortunate to get the 3-year SAFER grant that'll fund quite a bit of the payroll for our new firefighters. We have to appropriate about $250,000, which will cover the startup cost for 15 new firefighters. So that comes to you with a favorable recommendation. Have another transfer with regard to financial consulting, which has to do with financial reporting, and then a one-time property tax review that was done, and that also comes with a favorable recommendation. And the claims also come with a favorable recommendation. So, kind of a brief meeting, but that's a report.
Thank you, Mr. O'Connor. Any questions?
Mr. President, I would move to approve the claims.
Second.
There's a motion and a second to approve the claims. This is a hand vote. All those in favor, raise your right hand. 7-0. Moving on to previously discussed ordinances. Council to consider ordinance number 15-05-23 as amended. An ordinance amending ordinance number 18-03-22, defining the purpose, objectives, and guidelines for the residential facade improvement grant program. Mr. Head.
Good evening, council. Aaron Head, Community Engagement Manager with the City of Noblesville, for the record. So you guys heard this first reading last week, and we went through, worked with our legal department, and worked through some of those changes that we wanted to implement for the program pertaining to some provisions of, kind of the what ifs. So like, what if there's a non-payment to a contractor from a resident, and we put some of those teeth into this ordinance. John can probably speak to what that means. Put him on the spot real quick, so I love that. But he helped advise on some of those. If you want to give some feedback on it.
Sure. So the meat of the ordinance changed really in two respects. One is the document that Aaron spoke about last time. Rather than making it a document that is bound in time, we made it a little bit more flexible. So we're adopting the program and allowing us to use this document, but if it needs to change for individual circumstances, we can, with the intent being that we would get security. So that security could be the right to put a lien on a property if somebody doesn't get the property done correctly. It can include lien waivers, as Mr. O'Connor indicated, if we think that's going to help get someone to actually get a contractor involved. And it requires that when we give the grant to the grantee, that money get immediately transferred to the contractor, and we get immediate assurance of that. If not, we have the right to recoup all that money back to the city. And so that's really the ultimate goal, was to give you some surety that we can either put a lien on the property or get the money back through other means. And so that's how we amended it to, I think, make the program work a little bit more fluid and consistent with what the council was concerned about, which is how do we make sure our money's being used for the right thing. The program still requires the work be done first. So we will get assurance that the work is done, and then we would pay the money to the homeowner, who has to immediately give it to the contractor. And it's a three-party agreement. That's the way it's structured now. So the idea is we'll meet with the contractor and the homeowner and encourage the contractor to do the work, understanding that the city is financially behind this project to the percentage that we've agreed to. So that's kind of how we structured it to address your concerns.
Yeah, so we feel like these changes are really help implement the grant program in a way that meets our objectives as a city, which is to add some additional investment, one, to the Pleasant Street corridor as part of our agreement with Indiana DNR, and then also really be able to report back to Indiana DNR that we were able to implement new funds into a historic district, which was what their intent was for that agreement. So happy to answer any questions that you may have, and that's all from me, I think.
Any questions for Mr. Head?
I really appreciate this program, and I appreciate administrating it and getting out and meeting with people and figuring out what wasn't working and fine-tuning this to meet very specific for that neighborhood. I really appreciate your hard work on this one.
Thank you.
Any other questions?
Mr. President, I would move to amend ordinance 1505-23 as presented.
Second.
There's a motion and a second to amend ordinance number 15-05-23 as presented. This is a hand vote. All those in favor, raise your right hand. 7-0.
Mr. President, I would move to approve ordinance 1505-23 as amended.
Second.
There's a motion and a second to approve ordinance number 15-05-23 as amended. This is a roll call vote.
Mr. Ayer.
Aye.
Mr. Boyce.
Aye.
Mr. Davis.
Aye.
Mr. O'Connor,
Aye.
Mr. Peterson,
Aye.
Mr. Schwartz, Mr. Sparks, Ms. Wiles,
Aye.
Mr. Smith,
Aye.
7-0. The ordinance is passed.
Thank you, council.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Council to consider ordinance number 17-06-23, an ordinance amending ordinance number 53-07-05 for approximately 42 acres at 2001 Pleasant Street, known as the Hamilton County 4-H Fairgrounds. Ms. Yelton.
Good evening. I'm Joyce Ann Yelton, Development Services Manager in the Planning Department. Again, as you recall from our last meeting, this is the 40 acres of the Hamilton County 4-H Fairgrounds. During 2005, they actually originally came before us, and they were adopted under the Government Use Overlay District. Hamilton County will be removing 3 existing buildings on this site, constructing 2 new buildings, and doing a building addition onto the Llama Building. They sought several waivers, including front yard setbacks for buildings, parking. There were some landscaping waivers, as well as the construction of the wall sign that doesn't meet our requirements because of it being on a wall. It kind of takes in the whole entire wall as part of the sign. Again, the Plan Commission did send this to you with a unanimous vote. There were 10 members present at the meeting. That included all the waivers that they requested, and as well as there was one condition that was a part of their motion, which dealt with acceptance of the right-of-way acquisition document, to which Mr. Hughes has an update.
So I've had a very good conversation with the county attorney, and I think we're all on the same page, working out some final details on the holdover agreement, but I think we're all moving in the same direction. So that condition can remain, just that we're going to work through that, but I'm pleased to say I have no doubt we're going to get through it, and would recommend approval with that condition remaining, that we work out the right-of-way acquisition.
Any questions for Ms. Yelton?
Mr. President, I would move that we approve ordinance 170623 with the conditions that Mr. Hughes is outlining to be in compliance with the Plan Commission order.
Second.
There's a motion and a second to approve ordinance number 17-06-23 with the stipulations in consideration from the Plan Commission. This is a roll call vote.
Mr. Boyce,
Aye.
Mr. Davis,
Aye.
Mr. O'Connor,
Aye.
Mr. Peterson,
Aye.
Ms. Wiles,
Aye.
and Mr. Smith,
Aye.
7-0. The ordinance is passed.
Thank
Thank
you.
you.
Thank you. Council,
Thanks, Lee.
thank you. Council to consider ordinance number 18-06-23, an ordinance approving additional appropriations and multiple funds to provide funding for contingency and establishing a public hearing. Mr. Zalkowski.
Yes, good evening. Hopefully my voice keeps up with me. I'm battling a chest cold, and I'm here for 6 items tonight, so perfect timing on that. First item here, just a brief recap. Typically, we budget about $1 million in contingency every year. Due to unique circumstances, we came in under that $1 million for last year. So we're just asking to reestablish those historical amounts in the contingency. And we do have fiscal actions later on tonight that are going to access those funds. And it's not bringing it up back to the full million. I think it's $960,000 will be the total amount of the contingency for 2024.
Any questions for Mr. Zalkowski? If not, I will open the public hearing for ordinance number 18-06-23.
Mr. President, seeing no one come forward, I would move to close the public hearing for ordinance 180623.
There's a motion to close the public hearing for ordinance number 18-06-23.
Second.
This is a hand vote. All those in favor, raise your right hand. 7-0.
Mr. President,
Ms. Wiles.
I would move that we approve ordinance number 18-06-23 as presented.
Second?
There's a motion and a second to approve ordinance number 18-06-23. This is a roll call vote.
Mr. Davis.
Aye.
Mr. O'Connor.
Aye.
Mr. Peterson.
Aye.
Ms. Wiles.
Aye.
And Mr. Ayer.
Aye.
And Mr. Boyce.
Aye.
Mr. Smith.
Aye.
7-0, the ordinance is passed.
Thank you. Council to consider ordinance number 19-06-23, an ordinance approving an additional appropriation in the Lowett Special Distribution Fund to provide funding for the Community Crossings Matching Grant Program and establishing a public hearing. Mr. Zilgowski.
Yes, thank you. Again, second reading on this one, but a brief recap. This program grants us $1 million, but we do have to match that million. We typically budget $1 million each year, but because of a unique circumstance where the state operates on a fiscal year from June through July, we operate on a calendar year, January through December. We've now encountered a unique circumstance where we've received 2 grants in one of our budget years. And so while we did appropriate that first $1 million for the first grant, we need to appropriate an extra $1 million to receive the second grant of $1 million in this program.
Any questions for Mr. Zilgowski? If not, I will open the public hearing for ordinance number 19-06-23.
Mr. President,
Mr. O'Connor.
seeing no one come forward from the public, I would move to close the public hearing for ordinance 19-06-23.
Second?
There's a motion and a second to close the public hearing for ordinance number 19-06-23. This is a hand vote. All those in favor, raise your right hand. 7-0.
Mr. President? Mr. President, I move to approve ordinance 19-06-23.
Second.
There's a motion and a second to approve ordinance number 19-06-23. This is a roll call vote.
Mr. O'Connor.
Aye.
Mr. Peterson.
Aye.
Ms. Wiles.
Aye.
Mr. Ayer.
Aye.
Mr. Boyce.
Aye.
Mr. Davis.
Aye.
And Mr. Smith.
Aye.
7-0, the ordinance is passed.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Council to consider ordinance number 20-06-23, an ordinance approving an additional appropriation in the general fund to provide funding for firefighter hires reimbursable through the Federal Emergency Management Agency's SAFER grant and establishing a public hearing. Mr. Zilgowski.
Yes, thank you. So this is a very good opportunity for the city. FEMA is offering us a $4.5 million grant to support the hiring of additional 15 firefighters on top of the firefighters that we had already budgeted for in 2023. It's an opportunity for the city to kind of catch up with the public safety and have a firefighter recruitment size that's appropriate for a city of our size. This ordinance in particular builds out the budget for the fire department, although the grant does pay for the 15 firefighters' salaries for a period of 3 years. That'll be a partial year in 2023, a full year in 2024 and 2025, and then a partial year in 2026. Total amount, it's going to be an additional $1.5 million in the fire department budget.
Any questions for Mr. Zilgowski? Not, I will open the public hearing for ordinance number 20-06-23.
Mr. President,
Ms. Wiles?
seeing no one come forward, I would move that we close the public hearing for
Second.
ordinance 20-06-23.
There's a motion and a second to close the public hearing for ordinance number 20-06-23. This is a hand vote. All those in favor, raise your right hand. 7-0.
Mr. President,
Ms. Wiles?
I would move that we approve ordinance number 20-06-23 as presented.
Second?
There's a motion and a second to approve ordinance number 20-06-23. This is a roll call vote.
Mr. Peterson.
Yes.
Ms. Wiles.
Aye.
Mr. Ayer.
Aye.
Mr. Boyce.
Aye.
Mr. Davis.
Aye.
Mr. O'Connor.
Aye.
And Mr. Smith.
Aye.
7-0, the ordinance is passed.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Moving on to miscellaneous. Number 1, council to consider resolution RC-30-23, a resolution concerning the acquisition of real estate for South 10th Street sanitary sewer. Mr. Hellman.
Good evening, Council. Jim Hellman, Assistant City Engineer. As discussed in exec session, this resolution allows us to start the land acquisition process for a sanitary sewer improvement.
Any questions for Mr. Hellman?
Mr. President, I would move to approve resolution RC 3023.
Second.
There's a motion and a second to approve resolution RC-30-23. This is a hand vote. All those in favor, raise your right hand. 7-0. Thank you.
Thank you.
Council to consider resolution RC-32-23, a declaratory resolution approving a waiver of noncompliance and establishing a public hearing. Ms. Smith.
Good evening. I'm Amy Smith, Economic Development Manager with the Economic Development Department. This resolution is to preliminarily approve a waiver of noncompliance for real property tax abatement for 14515 Bergen Boulevard LLC for 2023 pay 24. To quickly refresh your memory, in April of 2020, the council approved a resolution for real property tax abatement for Opus Development Company to build a 157,000 square foot speculative multi-use commercial building at 14515 Bergen Boulevard. That's at the southwest corner of Bergen and 146th Street. As you may remember from previous years, if a business with a tax abatement does not submit their annual compliance documentation, they miss the deadline, they can request that a waiver of noncompliance be approved. The current building owner works with a property management firm who completed the form, but due to an administrative oversight, prevented the form from being returned. The business contact and the management company both reached out regarding the next steps, and we discussed the waiver of noncompliance option along with the $1,500 fee that Mr. O'Connor mentioned earlier. The business quickly submitted the fee and returned the completed compliance form. Mary Lemke, Central Region Operations Manager for LBA Realty, is here this evening to answer any questions that you may have. This does require a public hearing, and that will take place at your July 11th meeting. I'm happy to answer any questions.
Any questions for Ms. Smith?
Again, I just want to say I appreciate you staying on this and getting all this sorted together. It was great. Thank you.
Is there anything you'd like to add, Ms. Lipke?
Yeah, she's been wonderful, so thank you.
Any questions for Ms. Smith or Ms. Lipke?
Is this the first year that this owner's owned this building?
It's the second.
Second. Okay.
Fortunately, these don't happen very often, but we did have some discussion in the Finance Committee, but I think we're just going to kind of leave this alone for now. We'll see how it plays, but we don't want this to be an ongoing situation. Plus, it's obviously to the benefit of the property owner. And so these, I think, since I've been 15 years on the council, maybe we've seen this twice. So hopefully we won't see any more of these, but I know Amy and her mighty team do a pretty good job of trying to remind people to file these. So in any event, somebody made a motion.
I would make a motion to establish a public hearing for waiver of noncompliance at the next regular meeting.
I'll second that.
There's a motion and a second to establish a public hearing for a waiver of noncompliance at our next regular meeting. This is a hand vote. All in favor, raise your right hand. 7-0.
Mr. President, I move to approve resolution RC 3223.
Second.
There's a motion and a second to approve resolution RC-32-23. This is also a hand vote. All those in favor, raise your right hand. 7-0.
Thank you.
Thank you. Transfers. Council to consider transfer TA-06-23, an appropriation transfer in the general fund to provide funding for costs associated with firefighter hires that are not eligible for reimbursement from the SAFER grant. Mr. Zelgowski.
Yes. As Councilor O'Connor had hinted to, this is a $250,000 transfer request from contingency in order to properly train and outfit those additional 15 firefighters We do need that $250,000 that are not covered by the $4.5 million grant we're receiving from FEMA. That's approximately $16,700 per additional firefighter to properly train and equip them. So we're asking to move funds from contingency to the fire department in various series to cover those expenses.
Is it one time?
These are all one-time expenses, and if you have specific questions on what this will cover, Fire Chief Mitchell is here to answer this for you.
Basically turnout gear.
And training. Mr. President, I move to approve transfer TA 0623.
Second.
There's a motion and a second to approve transfer TA-06-23. This is the hand vote. All those in favor, raise your right hand. 7-0.
Thank you.
Council to consider transfer TA-09-23, an appropriation transfer in the general fund to provide funding for financial consulting services. Mr. Zolgowski.
Yes, thank you. This is a transfer into the Office of Finance and Accounting. For this expense in particular, we have typically under budgeted the expense and tried to cover any differences with savings within the department. We also try to manage down this expense as much as possible. But due to external circumstances, additional requirements and things such as the GASB, additional accounting requirements, this expense is starting to grow, and while we're going to continue to try and manage it down, we just thought it appropriate to budget it at the level, the maximum amount that the contract would allow. That's an additional $50,000 into the Office of Finance and Accounting's budget to cover that.
Any questions for Mr. Zolgowski?
This is for our annual audit.
It is.
Just a quick comment, Mr. President. I think even though there's a little more expense associated with this, Mr. Spalding pointed that out, and I'll echo that. This helps us from a ratings perspective. So we do go to the bond market, and we're going to be doing that at some regularity here in the not too distant future. That'll help us with the bond ratings, and I think the rating agencies appreciate the fact that we're going the extra mile and we're doing it right. So that might help us a little bit from an interest rate standpoint. So it's worth the money invested.
Yep.
And we're one of only a few cities in the state of Indiana that actually does this annual financial audit. And if you have any specific questions about that, the director, CFO Jeff Spalding is here to answer this.
Mr. President, I move we approve transfer TA-09-23.
Second?
There's a motion and a second to approve transfer TA-09-23. This is a hand vote. All those in favor, raise your right hand. 7-0. Council to consider transfer TA-10-23, an appropriation transfer in the general fund to provide funding for financial consulting services. The last one for Mr. Zolgowski.
My voice is keeping up,
Yeah.
so I'm happy about that. This is a $6,100 transfer from contingency. We had reached out to a third-party consulting company to help us do some analysis around the higher net assessed value. We wanted to check on two things in particular. One, what would be the impact to property taxpayers within the city? And two, the Indiana General Assembly was considering some potential laws that would be impacted by this, and so we were having them do some what-if analysis for us. Those didn't come to play out from the General Assembly, but it was definitely well worth the money. It gave us a lot of good insight into what the actual impact of this higher net assessed value would be. This is a one-time expense.
Do you know when those results will be available and when Finance Committee might be able to see some of that?
We're happy to share with them anytime. I can put it on the Finance Committee agenda, or you can just
Reach out.
contact me and
Okay.
walk you through it. But again, as Ian said, some of it was just about what the potential impact would be from state legislation that was being considered during the session that we were not here.
I think it's a smart move to make when there's so many gears moving to make sure that we're prepared. So.
Mr. President, I would move to approve transfer TA 1023.
Second.
There's a motion and a second to approve transfer TA-10-23. This is the hand vote. All those in favor, raise your right hand. 7-0.
Thank you.
Thank you. Council comments. Mr. Ayer.
Mr. Mayor Jensen, would you like to give us a little 4th of July pep talk about what's going on?
Always happy to do that, Mr. Ayer. Thank you. We will celebrate one of the longest traditions in Noblesville next Tuesday with the 4th of July Festival, one of the longest festivals in terms of its years in the making here in central Indiana. It will kick off with a parade through downtown Noblesville, led by 3 outstanding grand marshals, 3 of our former mayors, Mayor Mary Sue Rowland, Mayor John Ditzler, and Mayor Dennis Reddick will all be leading the parade in honor of our bicentennial. It's a great chance to ask them, obviously, and also thank them for their tremendous giving of their time and talents and treasures to the city of Noblesville. So we're very excited about that. Then we'll transition over to Forest Park, where the Flying Toasters will headline the performance that evening on the golf course. That, as if you haven't been yet, that's about 4 years now in the making, kind of a different setup there. My better half, First Lady of Noblesville, has kind of helped revise the way we've celebrated the 4th of July in downtown. It'll be at Forest Park with food trucks and a kid zone and a beer garden, and of course fireworks tapping off the end of the evening. So there is a full day planned for you in Noblesville. We hope to see you all out there enjoying the great evening on Tuesday. So thanks for asking the question. I'm sure I'll see you along the parade route, Brian.
I'm sure you will.
Yeah. Look, I just was on Amazon. I was on Amazon ordering myself a new 4th of July shirt that I'll be wearing on Tuesday,
Perfect. I'll have
assuming it fits.
grandchildren with me with their hand out for
Yes, there will be some candy along the route as well. I imagine our good friend, State Rep Chuck Goodrich, will have popsicles leading the way. I learned a long time ago to let him go first. He fires up the crowd and makes them really happy by the time they get a politician waving at them. So he leads the way and gets everybody excited. And thanks to our friends at Gaylor Electric and all those who have signed up to sponsor it. We try to utilize sponsorships within the community as much as possible for that event. And thanks to Brandon Bennett and the Parks Department, they've jumped in and helped generate some of those sponsorships. And thanks to all the community support, the business support has been tremendous to help us fund that privately this year.
Thank you.
Any other council comments? Okay, we are adjourned.